She buried her own mother alive for money. 26 years later, a single signature threatens to destroy everything she thought was buried forever. Her triumph was only the beginning of her downfall. Subscribe and activate the bell. There are moments when trust feels as natural as breathing, when you believe the people who share your blood would never harm you. For Victoria Thorne, that belief was the very foundation of her existence. But even the strongest foundations can crumble in a single, terrible instant. Greenwich, Connecticut. The name itself conjures images of manicured lawns stretching toward the horizon, stone mansions hidden behind ancient oaks, and a world where old money whispers rather than shouts its presence. Victoria Thorne, at 47 years old, embodied everything that world claimed to value. She was graceful, generous, the kind of woman who hosted charity galas with genuine warmth rather than social calculation. She had dedicated her life to causes that truly mattered: scholarships for underprivileged children, funding for domestic violence shelters, preservation of local historical landmarks. Her late husband's considerable fortune had become, in her hands, a tool for genuine good rather than mere display. But to her daughter Charlotte, Victoria's world was nothing more than a gilded cage, a prison of expectations, of proper behavior, of wealth that felt suffocating in its responsibility. Charlotte Sterling, she, had taken her husband's name with an eagerness. That should have been Victoria's first warning. Was 32, years old and burning with a hunger that terrified even those who claimed to love her. Beautiful in that sharp, calculated way that turns heads at Manhattan Gallery openings, Charlotte had cultivated an image of sophistication and social consciousness that masked something far darker lurking beneath the polished surface. "Mother, you don't understand what it's like," Charlotte had said one autumn afternoon, her voice tight with barely contained rage. They were standing in the conservatory of the Greenwich estate, surrounded by Victoria's beloved orchids, the afternoon light streaming through the glass creating patterns on the floor. "You've had everything handed to you on a silver platter. You've never had to fight for anything in your entire life." Victoria had reached out, trying desperately to bridge the chasm she felt opening between them like a fault line before an earthquake. "Darling, you have access to the trust. You live in a beautiful apartment in the city. What more could you possibly need? Access." Charlotte spat the word like poison, like something that burned her tongue. "I need control, Mother. I need to be free of your endless judgments about how I should live, what I should value, who I should be. I need to breathe without your expectations crushing the air from my lungs." What Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly known in that moment, was that Charlotte had already made her choice. With her husband Robert, a charming entrepreneur whose ambition far exceeded his moral compass or his business acumen, she had been planning for months. The Thorne Family Trust, worth $47 million, was carefully structured so that Victoria maintained absolute control until her death. Charlotte received a generous monthly allowance, enough for most people to live comfortably for years, but true power, complete control, that required patience. And Charlotte Sterling had run out of patience entirely. You see, dear listener, there's a particular kind of evil that grows in the soil of privilege. It's not born of desperation or the need for survival. It's cultivated by greed, nurtured by entitlement, fed by the twisted belief that wanting something badly enough somehow makes it yours by right. Charlotte had convinced herself over months, perhaps years, that her mother was merely an obstacle to be removed, not a human being with dreams and fears and the fundamental right to her own life. Victoria Thorne wasn't a person anymore in Charlotte's calculating mind. She was simply standing in the way of what Charlotte believed she deserved. Robert Sterling, for his part, played the role of the supportive, devoted husband with practiced ease that came from years of careful observation. Tall, with the kind of conventionally handsome features that inspire automatic trust in strangers, he was Charlotte's perfect accomplice in every sense. Where she burned with obvious, barely contained intensity that sometimes alarmed people, he was ice, calculating, patient, willing to wait for the perfect moment to strike. And that moment came on a cold November night that would change everything. The evening had started innocuously enough. the way most nightmares do. Victoria had been working late in her home office, reviewing grant applications for the charitable foundation that bore her late husband's name, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she made careful notes. The house was quiet. She had given the household staff the night off, looking forward to the peaceful solitude. When Charlotte called, suggesting an impromptu dinner at the family's secondary property, a smaller, secluded estate 30 miles north that had been in the Thorne family for 4 generations, Victoria felt a flutter of genuine hope in her chest. Perhaps her daughter wanted to reconnect, to bridge the growing distance between them that had become so painful. "Just the two of us," Charlotte had said, her voice carrying a warmth that Victoria hadn't heard in many months. "I've been thinking about what you said last time we spoke, Mother. About family. About what really matters in life. I want to talk, really talk, without all the usual distractions." Victoria had driven herself, taking the winding back roads through the Connecticut countryside that she had known since childhood. The November darkness was absolute, broken only by her headlights cutting through the bare trees reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. She remembered feeling peaceful, grateful even, believing with every fiber of her being that perhaps the terrible tension between them could finally begin to heal. The property, when she arrived shortly after 8 in the evening, was dark except for a single light burning in the old kitchen window. Charlotte's car was already parked in the circular drive, and when Victoria entered through the back door, she found her daughter in the kitchen, a bottle of expensive Bordeaux already open and breathing on the counter. "You made it," Charlotte said, that strange, unsettling warmth still evident in her voice. "I was starting to worry you might have changed your mind." They talked. Or rather, Victoria talked, opening her heart completely about her fears for Charlotte's happiness, about her desperate hopes that they could find some kind of common ground. Charlotte listened with an attentiveness that should have felt wrong, should have triggered some primal maternal warning deep in Victoria's mind. But it didn't, because who suspects their own child, the baby they carried, the little girl they raised, of planning murder? The human mind has a remarkable, almost miraculous capacity for trust, especially when it comes to those we've nurtured from their first breath. We tell ourselves that love, true, unconditional maternal love, creates an unbreakable bond, a connection that transcends all other considerations. But what happens when one side of that sacred bond has calcified into something else entirely? What happens when a child looks at her mother and sees not a person worthy of love and respect, but merely an obstacle to be removed by any means necessary? The wine, Victoria would later realize during long dark nights of reflection, had been drugged. Not heavily. Charlotte was far too clever, too calculating for such an obvious approach, just enough to make her drowsy, to slow her reactions by crucial seconds, to make her vulnerable in ways she had never been before. When Robert appeared from the shadows of the back hallway, moving with predatory silence, Victoria's initial confusion rapidly turned to genuine alarm that made her heart race. "Charlotte, what's going on? Why is Robert here? You said it would just be the two of us." Her daughter's face had changed in that instant, transformed as if a mask had been removed. The warmth evaporated completely, replaced by something cold and calculating that Victoria had never seen before in her daughter's eyes. "I'm sorry, Mother. I truly am. But you've left me absolutely no choice in this matter." What followed was the kind of waking nightmare that defies all comprehension, that the mind struggles to process even as it's happening. Robert, strong and methodical in his movements, had grabbed Victoria from behind before she could react. She struggled with every ounce of strength she possessed, but the drug had already weakened her significantly, and Charlotte, her own daughter, her own flesh and blood, simply watched with an expression of grim determination that revealed no trace of doubt or hesitation. They had planned everything with horrifying precision, with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of weeks or months of careful preparation. The old oak tree behind the property, the massive tree under which Victoria had played as a child during long summer afternoons, had become her intended grave. Robert had dug the deep pit weeks earlier during a visit, covering it carefully with plywood and leaves between their trips to the property. They had even purchased industrial plastic sheeting, duct tape, rope, all the grim implements of a carefully considered, coldly calculated murder. "Please," Victoria had begged, tears streaming down her face as the reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave of ice water. "Charlotte, please. I'm your mother. I love you more than my own life." Charlotte had knelt beside her then, and for one brief, heart-stopping moment, Victoria saw something flicker in her daughter's eyes. Doubt? Regret? Some tiny spark of the loving child she had once been? But it passed quickly, extinguished like a candle flame, replaced by cold steel resolve that was somehow more terrifying than anger would have been. "I know you do, Mother. I've never doubted your love for me. Not for a single moment. But love doesn't pay for the life I deserve. Love doesn't give me the control I need. Love doesn't set me free from your endless expectations." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that would haunt Victoria for years to come. "Sleep now, Mother, and give me what is mine by right. There are moments when trust feels as natural as breathing, when you believe the people who share your blood would never harm you." For Victoria Thorne, that belief was everything. But foundations crumble in an instant. Greenwich, Connecticut. Victoria Thorne, at 47, embodied grace and generosity. She had dedicated her life to charitable causes, transforming her late husband's fortune into genuine good. But to her daughter Charlotte, Victoria's world was a gilded cage. Charlotte Sterling was 32, burning with hunger that terrified even those who claimed to love her. Beautiful and calculated, she had cultivated sophistication that masked something darker beneath. "Mother, you don't understand," Charlotte said one autumn afternoon, voice tight with rage. "You've had everything handed to you. You've never had to fight for anything. Darling, you have access to the trust. What more do you need?" "Access." Charlotte spat the word like poison. "I need control, Mother. I need to be free of your endless judgments." What Victoria didn't know, Charlotte had already made her choice. With her husband Robert, whose ambition exceeded his moral compass, she had been planning for months. The Thorne Family Trust, worth $47 million, was structured so Victoria maintained control until death. Charlotte received an allowance, but true power, that required patience. And Charlotte Sterling had run out of patience. There's a particular evil that grows in privilege's soil, not born of desperation, but cultivated by greed. The twisted belief that wanting something badly enough makes it yours by right. Charlotte had convinced herself her mother was an obstacle, not a person. Robert Sterling played the supportive husband with practiced ease. Tall, conventionally handsome, he was Charlotte's perfect accomplice. Where she burned with intensity, he was ice. Calculating, patient. That moment came on a cold November night. Charlotte called, suggesting dinner at the family's secondary property. "Just the two of us. I've been thinking about what you said, Mother, about family. I want to talk." Victoria drove through the Connecticut countryside feeling peaceful, believing the tension between them could finally heal. When she arrived, Charlotte was in the kitchen, wine already open. They talked. Victoria opened her heart about her fears for Charlotte's happiness. Charlotte listened with attentiveness that should have felt wrong. But who suspects their own child of murder? The wine had been drugged. When Robert appeared from the shadows, Victoria's confusion turned to alarm. "Charlotte, what's going on?" Her daughter's face changed. Warmth evaporated, replaced by cold calculation. "I'm sorry, Mother, but you've left me no choice." What followed defied comprehension. Robert grabbed Victoria from behind. They had planned everything with horrifying precision. The old oak tree behind the property had become her intended grave. Robert had dug the pit weeks earlier. "Please," Victoria begged. "Charlotte, please. I'm your mother. I love you." Charlotte knelt beside her, and for a brief moment something flickered in her eyes. But it passed quickly. "I know you do, Mother, but love doesn't pay for the life I deserve. Love doesn't give me control." She leaned closer, whispering, "Sleep now, Mother, and give me what is mine." What does it feel like to be buried alive by your own child? How does the human mind process such absolute, incomprehensible betrayal? These aren't merely rhetorical questions, dear listener. These are the questions that Victoria Thorne would wrestle with in the suffocating darkness beneath 6 feet of cold Connecticut soil. Questions that would define every moment of what came after. They had bound her hands behind her back and her feet at the ankles with rough rope that cut into her skin. Charlotte had insisted on the duct tape over her mouth, pressing it down firmly to ensure no sound could escape. Robert had wrapped her entire body in the industrial plastic sheeting before lowering her into the grave with surprising gentleness, as if such care mattered at that point. Victoria remembered with crystalline clarity the sound of the first shovelful of dirt hitting the plastic above her head. A dull, final thud that seemed to echo not just in her ears but in her very bones, announcing the end of everything she had known. She should have died within minutes. By every logical measure, every medical probability, Victoria Thorne should have suffocated quickly in that makeshift grave, becoming just another tragic statistic. But fate, or perhaps something more mysterious, something that defies easy explanation, had other plans entirely. Years earlier, after experiencing a series of debilitating anxiety attacks following her husband's unexpected death from a heart attack, Victoria's therapist had recommended she carry a small emergency breathing device. It was the kind of thing that wealthy, anxious people sometimes did, another form of insurance against an unpredictable and frightening world. She had kept it in the inner pocket of her jacket and had honestly forgotten about its existence entirely, until the crushing darkness closed in around her and instinct took over. With her hands bound tightly behind her back, it took precious minutes that felt like hours to work the small cylindrical device free from her pocket through the layers of plastic. In the suffocating confines of the makeshift grave, every tiny movement was absolute agony, every shift sending waves of pain through her battered body. The plastic sheeting clung to her face like a second skin, and the weight of the earth above pressed down with crushing, unbearable force. But Victoria had always been stronger than she looked, stronger than even she had realized, and the will to survive, even when betrayed by her own blood in the most horrific way imaginable, burned with fierce, undeniable intensity deep within her core. The device bought her time. Not comfort, not salvation, not any real hope of rescue, just time. Hours passed in that earthen prison, each breath a desperate battle against suffocation, each moment a supreme test of will and endurance. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind playing tricks, showing her memories of Charlotte as a baby, as a laughing child, as a teenager full of promise. The contrast between those memories and her current reality was almost more unbearable than the physical suffering. How long can a human being endure the genuinely impossible? How many hours can pass in absolute, crushing darkness, in confinement so complete that every breath might be your last, before the mind simply surrenders to what seems inevitable? Victoria Thorne would later say, in the rare moments when she could bring herself to speak of it at all, that she lost all track of time in that grave, that the darkness became eternal, existing outside of normal reality, that her daughter's face, cold and calculating and utterly without mercy, haunted her even in that buried hell, perhaps especially there. But someone was watching that night, someone who would change absolutely everything. Marcus Webb had been the caretaker of the Thorne family's secondary property for nearly 40 years, since he was a young man fresh out of the Army. He lived in a small, modest house on the edge of the extensive land, maintaining the grounds with meticulous care and keeping watch over a place that the family visited only occasionally throughout the year. He was a quiet, unassuming man, a widower who had found a kind of peace in the solitude of his work and the rhythm of the seasons. That particular night, Marcus simply couldn't sleep, tossing and turning with a sense of unease he couldn't name or explain. Something felt profoundly wrong in a way that bypassed rational thought and went straight to instinct. He had seen Charlotte's distinctive car arrive earlier that evening, followed shortly after by another vehicle he didn't recognize. He had thought nothing of it at first. The family often had guests. But as the hours passed and both cars remained long past when visitors typically left, his discomfort grew into something approaching alarm. At 3 in the morning, unable to ignore the nagging feeling any longer, Marcus walked the property with his heavy-duty flashlight, following an instinct he couldn't have articulated even if someone had asked. He found the freshly disturbed earth beneath the massive old oak tree, soil that had been carefully smoothed over but couldn't completely hide the significant disturbance, beneath two eyes that knew every inch of these grounds. The plywood cover had been removed and discarded nearby. What drove him to dig in that spot at that hour? He would never be able to fully explain it to himself or anyone else. He would later tell people it was like a voice in his head or a hand on his shoulder guiding him. But dig he did, frantically, desperately, his hands working the shovel with increasing urgency as some part of him understood that seconds mattered, until the industrial plastic sheeting appeared beneath his blade, glinting in his flashlight beam. Victoria emerged from that grave more dead than alive, her body in severe shock, her heart beating irregularly, barely clinging to life. Her mind had fractured under the unbearable weight of what her daughter had done, what Charlotte had been willing to do for money. Marcus carried her limp form to his old pickup truck with shaking hands and drove through the dark night. Not to a hospital, where too many questions would be asked, where police would inevitably become involved, but to a small rural clinic he knew of in Vermont, run by a doctor who understood that some people needed help without the intense scrutiny of official channels and bureaucratic procedures. Trauma changes a person at the cellular level. Victoria Thorne died in that grave. What emerged was something new, something that would eventually call itself Isabel. Victoria spent weeks in twilight between life and death. Her vocal cords were damaged, her body battered. But physical damage was nothing compared to psychological devastation. Fear paralyzed her. Charlotte thought she was dead. If Victoria revealed herself, what would stop her daughter from trying again? Who would believe such a horrific story? So she stayed silent, trapped in a prison made of terror. Meanwhile, Charlotte performed the role of her life, the grieving daughter. She called police 24 hours after the burial, voice perfectly calibrated with panic. The investigation was perfunctory. Victoria's car was found at the property. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. After the required waiting period, Victoria Thorne was declared legally dead. The trust transferred entirely to Charlotte's control. $47 million. Charlotte purchased a Manhattan penthouse, through legendary parties, was photographed at galas. She spoke at charity events about family values. And Robert. He played dutiful husband, though resentment grew. The fortune was Charlotte's. He received an allowance, a reminder he was dependent on his wife's goodwill. Long, painful months passed in the quiet, isolated world of the Riverside Clinic, each day blending into the next in a haze of recovery and psychological adjustment. Victoria, still not Isabel, not yet anyone with a clear sense of self or purpose, existed in a state of numb survival that was neither truly living nor completely succumbing to despair. She helped with basic, mindless tasks around the clinic in exchange for her continued stay and the roof over her head. Working in the industrial kitchen, folding endless stacks of donated linens, cleaning tasks that required no speech and mercifully little human interaction. She moved through her days like a ghost, barely present. Dr. Chen watched her with growing concern, recognizing all the classic signs of profound, potentially permanent trauma but respecting the woman's obvious, desperate need for silence and complete anonymity. She had seen enough genuinely broken people during her years running the clinic to know with certainty that healing couldn't be forced or rushed, that sometimes mere survival was enough of a victory, at least in the beginning. But it was Brenda Calloway, a warm-hearted nurse who had dedicated 15 years of her life to working at the clinic, who finally managed to break through Victoria's seemingly impenetrable walls of fear and self-imposed isolation. Brenda was in her late 60s, a woman who had spent her entire adult life in devoted service to others, often at great personal cost. She possessed a rare gift for seeing people, truly, deeply seeing them, in a way that cut through all pretense and defensive barriers like a laser through fog. One quiet afternoon in late spring, while helping Victoria sort through boxes of donated clothes destined for the clinic's neediest patients, Brenda noticed something that would change absolutely everything. A locket. Small, delicate, clearly antique gold. The kind of precious heirloom that gets passed down carefully through generations of a family, accumulating history and meaning with each transfer. Victoria wore it constantly around her neck, even though it seemed oddly formal, even incongruous, for someone working in a clinic laundry room. "That's beautiful," Brenda said softly, her voice genuinely warm and curious as she nodded at the locket glinting in the afternoon light. "May I take a closer look at it?" Victoria's hand instinctively went to her throat, protective, almost defensive. But something in Brenda's gentle expression, in her kind eyes that seemed incapable of judgment, made her relax slightly. With trembling fingers, she unclasped the delicate chain and handed the locket over, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't quite name. Brenda opened the locket with careful reverence, and her expression shifted dramatically from mere curiosity to profound shock in the space of a single heartbeat. Inside was a faded photograph, its edges worn with age and countless viewings, but the image still remarkably clear. A young woman with Victoria's same distinctive eyes, the same elegant bone structure, the same shape of face. "My God," Brenda whispered, her voice barely audible, one hand rising to cover her mouth. "This is Eleanor Thorne. I would recognize her anywhere, even after all these years." Victoria's eyes widened in complete shock. Her hands shook as she grabbed frantically for paper and pen from a nearby table, scribbling with desperate intensity. "You knew my mother? How? When?" Sometimes redemption begins not with grand, sweeping gestures or dramatic moments of revelation, but with small, quiet moments of genuine recognition. With someone truly seeing you, seeing who you really are beneath the protective layers, when you thought you had become permanently invisible to the entire world, when you believed you would never be seen again. Brenda Calloway had been a private duty nurse back in the 1970s, working for wealthy families throughout Connecticut who could afford personalized, round-the-clock care. One of those families, one of her most memorable assignments, had been the Thornes. She had cared for Eleanor Thorne during the final, difficult months of her brave battle with aggressive cancer, had been intimately present for intensely private moments of fear and courage, of despair and hope. She had held the older woman's increasingly frail hand during the long, dark nights as Eleanor spoke with fierce determination about her hopes and dreams for her infant daughter, about the kind of woman she prayed Victoria would become. "Victoria," Eleanor had said one night, her voice weak but filled with unmistakable determination even in the face of death. "I named her Victoria because I wanted her to be strong, truly strong. To be victorious over whatever challenges and obstacles life would inevitably bring her way." Now, more than 2 decades later, in a small clinic hundreds of miles from Greenwich, Brenda was staring at that same infant, now grown into a severely traumatized woman who had somehow, impossibly, survived her own daughter's attempt to murder her for money. They talked, or rather, Brenda talked with increasing emotion while Victoria wrote frantically on page after page of paper, her handwriting becoming more agitated as the story unfolded, for hours that afternoon, well into the evening. The whole horrific story came pouring out in a torrent of words and tears. Charlotte's calculated betrayal, the meticulously planned burial, Marcus's miraculous rescue that had saved her life, and, most devastatingly of all, Victoria's current state of complete paralysis, frozen by overwhelming fear. What could she possibly do from this position? Who in the world would believe her incredible story? Brenda listened to every word without the slightest hint of judgment, her expression shifting gradually from initial shock to righteous anger to something that looked remarkably like fierce, protective determination. "You're asking entirely the wrong questions," she finally said with conviction when Victoria's frantic writing had finally slowed to a stop. "You're asking, 'What can I do?' when you should be asking yourself, 'What am I willing to become?' Your daughter thinks she successfully killed you. She's built an entire life, a complete identity, on your grave. But you're alive, truly alive, and that simple fact means you have something she'll never, ever have, the genuine power to rise again, stronger than before. But how?" Victoria wrote, her hand shaking so badly the words were barely legible. I have absolutely nothing. No legal identity, no money, no resources, no conceivable way to fight her. And if she somehow finds out I'm alive— Brenda's expression hardened with resolve. Then we make absolutely sure that when she finds out, if she ever finds out, you're powerful enough, strong enough, protected enough that she can't possibly touch you. We make sure you have real resources, genuine protection, and most importantly of all, a clear sense of purpose that goes beyond mere survival. Dr. Finch was a legend, a former district attorney who'd resigned after watching too many powerful people escape justice. He was in his 70s, with silver hair and eyes that saw through pretense. Your daughter buried you alive for an inheritance, he said. And you want revenge. Isabel nodded. Revenge is a blade that cuts both ways. But justice requires patience, strategy, and wisdom to know when to walk away. He leaned forward. I can't give you your old life back, but I can give you tools to build something new. I can teach you to fight where the wealthy can be held accountable. Civil law, divorce law, inheritance disputes, estate battles. If you want to destroy someone like your daughter, you don't do it through criminal charges. You do it by dismantling their life piece by piece through the courts. You become the weapon she never saw coming. Transformation requires a crucible. Isabel Thorne had been shattered by her daughter's betrayal. But from those fragments, she would build something Charlotte could never have anticipated. Dr. Finch arranged funding through a scholarship program. Isabel began with online courses, devouring material on law. Her vocal cords healed with therapy, though her voice remained lower, raspy. She learned to use it to her advantage. Her quiet tone commanded attention. After 2 years, she enrolled in Boston Law School. At 49, she was older than classmates, but Isabel had advantages. She had lived through absolute betrayal, understood how law could be weaponized. She excelled at family law, understanding psychological warfare in divorce courts. While classmates saw abstract principles, Isabel saw battle strategy. Revenge requires patience bordering on superhuman. Every day, Isabel watched Charlotte thrive on social media. Galas, lavish lifestyle, interviews about honoring her mother's legacy. Each image was a knife, but Isabel transmuted pain into fuel. She graduated top of her class, passed the bar on first attempt, secured a position at a prestigious Boston firm specializing in high-net-worth divorces. And she was brilliant. Divorce law was perfect for someone who understood betrayal deeply. She was ruthless in depositions, surgical in cross-examinations, uncanny at finding buried financial secrets. Within 5 years, senior partner. Within 8, she had capital to start her own firm. Thorne and Associates' reputation spread quickly. Isabel Thorne was the attorney you hired to win at any cost. Cold, calculating, brilliant, she built a fortune that gave her independence. But every case was practice for the real battle. 26 years. That's how long it took for pieces to fall into place. The opportunity arrived through whisper networks of family law attorneys. Robert Sterling was filing for divorce from Charlotte Sterling, the partners in murder, turning on each other like predictable predators. Robert had grown tired of being the lesser party. Charlotte controlled the trust absolutely. His resentment grew. He wanted out. More specifically, he wanted half of the $47 million. Charlotte was fighting the divorce savagely. Robert's attorneys were outmatched, shopping for a heavy hitter, someone with Isabel's reputation. When the offer came, her assistant was surprised by her immediate acceptance. I know, Isabel replied, voice carefully neutral. That's exactly why I'm taking it. Isabel's first meeting with Robert Sterling was everything she'd hoped and feared. 26 years had aged him, but not improved him. Handsome in that conventional way, but weakness around his mouth, paranoia in his eyes. Miss Thorne, I need someone who can match Charlotte's aggression. Isabel studied him. Expensive suit couldn't hide the tremor in his hands. Tell me about your marriage. What followed was a self-serving narrative. According to Robert, He'd been the supportive husband, standing by Charlotte through her mother's mysterious disappearance. "We believe we have grounds for equitable distribution," his attorney explained. Isabel nodded slowly. "You want me to find leverage?" "Exactly," Robert said, relief flooding his features. What Robert didn't understand, Isabel wasn't interested in his divorce settlement. She wanted complete access to Charlotte's financial life and legal authority to tear it apart. Isabel spent months building the case. Forensic accountants, private investigators, digital forensics, ostensibly for Robert's divorce. But Isabel was looking for something else. The paper trail leading back to Victoria Thorne's death. And she found it. 26 years had made Charlotte sloppy, overconfident. The property where Victoria was buried had been sold 5 years after the disappearance. Charlotte used proceeds to purchase a Soho gallery. But there were records, property surveys, environmental assessments, landscaping notes about removing old oak tree from the exact location where Marcus found Victoria's grave. Isabel found payments to Robert's brother, a contractor, made weeks before Victoria's disappearance. Payments for property renovation with no corresponding permits. She found Charlotte's journal with an entry dated 1 month before the murder. "Mother will never understand. Some cages can only be opened from the outside." Each piece was circumstantial alone. Together, they painted a picture that would destroy Charlotte. The divorce proceedings entered deposition phase. Charlotte would testify under oath about her finances, her marriage, and her acquisition of the Thorne fortune. Isabel's trap was set. Charlotte Sterling entered the conference room with confidence of someone never truly challenged. She was 58, still beautiful in that carefully maintained way. Impeccable clothing, professionally colored hair. She barely glanced at Isabel. The deposition began with standard questions. Charlotte answered with practiced ease. For 3 hours, Isabel played the aggressive divorce attorney perfectly. Charlotte's confidence grew. Then Isabel pivoted. "Mr. Sterling, let's talk about how you acquired the Thorne family trust," Charlotte's attorney objected. "I don't see relevance. It's relevant because my client contends his contributions began from acquisition. I need to establish the baseline." Charlotte shrugged. "My mother disappeared in November 1999. After the waiting period, she was declared dead, and the trust transferred to me." "The property where she was last seen. Tell me about it." "It was sold in 2004. Before the sale, there were landscaping changes, correct?" Charlotte's expression flickered with unease. "I don't recall specific details." Isabel pulled out a document. "This is a work order from March 1999, removing an old oak tree. Do you remember commissioning this?" "I don't. Why does this matter?" "Because the work was never completed. The tree was never removed. But there are payments to a contractor, your husband's brother, for property renovation in October 1999, weeks before your mother vanished." Charlotte's attorney objected. "This is irrelevant to the divorce." But Isabel watched Charlotte's face, seeing cracks form. "Let me ask something else. Have you had soil testing done on that property?" "What?" "Soil composition analysis. The property has very specific soil, heavy clay with distinctive mineral composition. Unusual for Connecticut. It leaves traces on clothing, tools, anything that contacts it. Remarkably persistent." She slid another document across. "Forensic analysis of items from your mother's car. Soil samples. That same distinctive composition." Charlotte's hands trembled. "Your mother drove herself there that night. She came willingly, thinking she was meeting you for conversation. Reconciliation, perhaps?" "This is outrageous," Charlotte's attorney said. You're conducting criminal investigation under guise of divorce deposition." But Charlotte stared at Isabel with dawning, terrible recognition. Isabel pulled out one final photograph, a family picture. A woman beneath the oak tree, holding a small child. "Your mother loved that property," Isabel said softly. "She told me the oak tree was her favorite place on earth. Remarkable that someone who loved a place so much would disappear from it without trace." Charlotte's face went pale. "Who are you?" Charlotte whispered. This was the moment Isabel had imagined for 26 years. But looking at her daughter's stricken face, Isabel felt something unexpected. Not triumph, just profound, aching sadness. "I'm the attorney who's going to make sure the truth comes out," Isabel said quietly. "I believe some crimes are too terrible to remain hidden, no matter how much money tries to bury them." She stood, gathering documents. "This deposition is over. But, Miss Sterling, I'd advise you to speak with your attorney about what I've uncovered, because what started as a divorce case is about to become something much bigger." Charlotte sat frozen, her world crumbling. The fallout was swift. Within 48 hours, Charlotte's attorneys withdrew. Within a week, the DA reopened investigation into Victoria Thorne's disappearance. Robert made a deal, confessing everything. The media descended. Charlotte Sterling became the daughter who murdered her mother for inheritance. The night before Charlotte's sentencing, Isabel visited the detention facility. Charlotte was brought in wearing orange, looking decades older than 58. "Why are you here?" Charlotte asked. "Come to gloat?" "I'm here because I need to understand how you could bury the person who gave you life." Charlotte laughed bitterly. "You think there's some profound explanation. But the truth is simpler and worse. I wanted the money. I wanted control. I made a cost-benefit analysis and decided you were worth more to me dead than alive. Sometimes truth is more devastating than lies. Sometimes evil isn't complicated. Sometimes it's just a choice, a cold decision that one person's life has less value than another's desires. You don't recognize me, do you?" Isabel said softly. Charlotte frowned. "You're Robert's attorney. Look closer. At my eyes, the shape of my face, the locket I'm wearing." Isabel pulled the gold locket from beneath her shirt. Charlotte's eyes widened, face shifting from confusion to disbelief to horrified recognition. "No, that's impossible. You're dead. I buried you." "You heard me stop screaming," Isabel corrected quietly. "There's a difference. You buried Victoria Thorne, Charlotte, but she survived. She became someone you could never have imagined, someone strong enough to bring you down." Charlotte's composure shattered. She backed away, breath coming in panicked gasps. "This isn't real. It's real. I'm real. I'm your mother, Charlotte, the woman you murdered for money. And I'm here to tell you that you failed." Charlotte collapsed into her chair, sobbing, and Isabel felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief. Just profound weariness and realization that revenge couldn't give her back what was stolen. "What happens now?" Charlotte gasped. "You're going to prison for life. The fortune is gone. Your reputation destroyed. You've lost everything. And I've realized I don't need you to suffer more. I need to live." Charlotte's trial was swift. Guilty on all counts. Life without parole. In following weeks, Isabel found herself at a crossroads. Brenda Calloway visited with a proposal. "I've seen hundreds of women at the clinic. Abuse victims, people escaping dangerous situations. You know what they need? Legal help. Someone who understands the system." The idea took root immediately. Within 6 months, the Victoria Thorne Foundation for Familial Justice was established, providing free representation to victims of abuse within families. The name was deliberate. Time to resurrect Victoria Thorne, not as buried victim, but as symbol of survival. Victoria scheduled a press conference to announce the foundation's launch. "My name is Victoria Thorne," she said, voice steady. 26 years ago, I was murdered by my daughter Charlotte for control of my family's fortune. I was buried alive beneath an oak tree. I survived through luck, determination, and the kindness of strangers who had no reason to help me." Journalists looked up, cameras swiveling to the woman at the podium. "I spent years in hiding, not because I was afraid, but because I understood that accusations without power are noise. So I built power. I became an attorney, developed skills necessary to bring my daughter to justice, and did exactly that. But I didn't call this conference to talk about revenge. I called it to talk about what comes after. The Victoria Thorne Foundation exists to provide legal representation to victims of financial, emotional, and physical abuse within families." The revelation sent shockwaves. Victims began reaching out in droves. Women financially controlled by partners. Adult children stolen from by parents. People seeing their experiences reflected in Victoria's story. Over following months, Charlotte began writing letters to the foundation. At first defiant, argumentative, but slowly they changed. She wrote about other inmates, recognizing patterns in her own behavior. Narcissism, inability to see others as human, constant need for control. Victoria read each letter, sharing with the Foundation's clinical board. "She's starting the work," they observed. Victoria began writing brief responses, official correspondence offering resources for rehabilitation programs. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was, perhaps, a kind of peace. 2 years later, Victoria received unexpected news. Charlotte was gravely ill. Cancer advanced. Months to live. Charlotte was requesting a final visit. Victoria sat with the letter for days. Her therapist asked, "Do you want to see her?" "Part of me thinks I should refuse, but the other part remembers she's still my daughter." Victoria made the trip. Charlotte looked skeletal, ravaged by cancer. "You came," Charlotte whispered. "I almost didn't." "To gloat." "No, I just feel sad. Sad for all the time wasted, all the potential destroyed." Charlotte closed her eyes, tears leaking. "I've been writing to the Foundation. Did you read the letters? Everyone? Did they change how you see me? They showed me you're capable of self-reflection. But I'm not sure if that's real change or just philosophical musings facing mortality." Harsh, but fair. They sat in silence, medical equipment beeping. "I need you to know something," Charlotte said. "I can't undo what I did, but I am sorry, genuinely sorry. Not just because I got caught or I'm dying, but because I finally understand what I destroyed." "What did you destroy?" "Everything, your life, but also any chance I had at genuine happiness. I spent decades living off your money, convinced I was free, but I was just alone. Isolated. I never allowed anyone to truly know me because what I'd done was so terrible I couldn't risk intimacy. Is there such a thing as deathbed redemption? Can evil be balanced by final remorse?" Victoria looked at her dying daughter, feeling something shift. Not forgiveness, but a release of anger that had sustained her. "I believe you're sorry," Victoria said slowly, "and I believe you understand what you did. But Charlotte, that doesn't erase the past. It just is. I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just that you know I finally see clearly." Victoria took Charlotte's fragile hand. "I'm letting go of my hatred, not because you've earned it, but because carrying it has become exhausting. You'll die soon. I'm choosing to live without being defined by what you did to me. That's more grace than I deserve. Probably. But I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me." She paused at the door. "Charlotte, I wish things had been different. I wish we'd found a way to love each other better." "Me too, Mother." "Me too." Charlotte died 3 weeks later. Victoria attended the small funeral, standing apart. She placed a single white rose on the casket. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but acknowledgement. Charlotte had been her daughter. That fact, terrible and complicated, deserved recognition. Victoria Thorne lived to be 82, 30 years after climbing from that grave. She spent final years working with the Foundation, traveling, maintaining relationships with chosen family. The night she died, surrounded by Brenda, Marcus Webb's daughter, and former staff, she said the Foundation was necessary. "But if I could do it over, I'd have started it sooner, not as revenge, but as response to my suffering. I wasted years consumed by anger. While justice mattered, Charlotte needed consequences. I gave her too much power over my life." She paused. "Promise me something. Tell the Foundation's story not as revenge, but as transformation, of choosing to be more than victim or avenger, of learning that the best response to evil is not matching it, but transcending it." Victoria died peacefully, surrounded by love, the kind that comes not from blood, but from shared purpose. 20 years later, the Victoria Thorne Foundation had become one of the most respected advocacy organizations in America. Operating in 38 states with over 300 staff, It had helped more than 15,000 victims reclaim their lives. The Foundation's headquarters remained in Greenwich. The conference room featured Victoria's portrait from her later years, capturing both strength and compassion. Beneath it, a mission statement. We exist for those whose trust has been betrayed by those they loved most. We fight for justice not as revenge, but as restoration, returning to victims what was stolen and offering tools to rebuild lives of dignity and purpose. The property where Victoria was buried became a non-profit supporting survivors of violent crime. They maintained the memorial beneath the oak tree, creating a meditation garden.